What's up, folks? Casual Dad here with another faction review. I'm going to go through every single Warlord and a couple top cards and talk about kind of the meta placement for the Tau Empire. And this is, I believe, the fourth video I've done. I've done Tyranids, Servants of the Emperor, and Orcs. I'm going to knock out all the factions eventually at some point, but I did have a request for Tau, so I'm going to start there. And for Tau, I'm actually going to do something a little bit differently here. I'm not going to start with the Warlords. I'm actually going to start with a couple of the key cards that are really defining the faction right now. And if you've played anything in the ladder, especially in the upper tiers, you will have seen these guys. I'm going to talk about the two really top dogs here. We've got Longstrike, and obviously mine's not terribly high level, but this guy, up kind of where I'm seeing him, is legendary, so he's got the dual traits. He's always had that fire on drop, that precision shot, but recently got the Inspiring Presence to do that damage buff to himself and any other bodyguards or any other cards on the table. And that's really important to note with him because his base damage is so high. You start stacking 20, 25%, 30% bonus damage on that, it adds up real quick. And in conjunction or combination with that precision shot, which since he's legendary both can get up to level 4, he's dropping around 400 damage in the first turn he appears on the board. That's the level where it's going to take out a greater demon, even with fear. It's going to shoot a card straight through its shields. It just does insane damage when this guy drops on the board, and I'm seeing him in at high level in basically every single Tau deck I'm running into, and this is a really good time to talk about Tau because they are definitely getting their moment in the sun. There are at least 4 Warlords who are performing extremely well at the very top of the ladder, which is kind of cool to see because up until the last couple of seasons with secondary traits, Tau didn't really perform at that level. You saw them occasionally, but really not very much, and now they're all over it. I would say that Tau being this dominant is actually one of the reasons I'm not seeing some of the scarier pieces. So they really kind of hamper a Badruk because they have a combination of a lot of hit points and really good range damage. And Akaran too. Because of the sheer amount of damage these guys can put out, they will knock through shields and take down some of those powerful bodyguards very, very quickly. So there's Longstrike, and then also, of course, the Barracuda. The other day I called this a manta and was called out for it. It is not a manta, excuse me, it's a Barracuda, the other fish. Yeah, and this one is similar, just has a ton of damage, gained that outflank trait, is also legendary, so it can go up to rank 4 on both of its traits. Doesn't do anything fancy, it just hits really, really, really hard. And that barrage trait means that even if you have cards in front of it, your secondary cards are not safe. So even if you have a Tervagon blocking this guy with your little Termagant every turn, he's still bleeding damage over into your Warlord or whatever card is put in the middle as well. And fairly quickly, too, especially if he's on the board with Longstrike, which in your upper tier decks he usually is. So those are 2 extremely powerful cards to watch out for. Everything in kind of the expensive shooting range is very viable in Tau. This guy with Big Game Hunter is very potent, and then this guy with also Barrage comes up a lot. But and then your 2 big suits also will see quite a bit of play as well. And then kind of everything in the mid-range, all of these guys you actually will see fairly often. A lot of powerful cards in here, and I'll touch on a couple of these as we go through. And then, excuse me, not quite so much a staple as some of the others, but these 3 right in the middle here. You've got your 18-point precision shot, 14 points, excuse me. You've got your 12-point shield, and then you've got your kind of cheaper Inspire. All 3 of those feature in just about every single Tau deck out there with some rare exceptions, but you'll see quite a few of those guys in play. Another common one is, of course, your other shielded ranged attack card. It's going to be this guy here. And now getting to the Warlords, let's jump right in. We've only got 5, so this will be a little bit quicker. Going to start again on the cheaper end with Darkstrider himself. Common, only has the single trait. Stats are not terribly impressive. If I see a Darkstrider deck across the table, for one, the AI doesn't play it correctly, so they don't actually use his ability, so he's not that scary. And for another, Darkstrider himself is not very durable. So he's one that's a favorable Tau matchup because all you have to do is take out Darkstrider, depending on what deck you have. If you don't have a Headhunter deck, he can be quite challenging, even with an AI. If you're playing as him, he's just an absolute blast because his ability is Fighting Retreat. So whenever a friendly Tau card changes a lane, it makes a ranged attack at 50% damage targeting the card it moved away from. And they added the addendum, this does not affect initial deployment because that would be absurd. But what this means is anytime you shift a card from one lane to another, it'll shoot for half of its attack value, ranged attack value, at the lane it was in. And if you lose 2 cards in a turn or you get wiped, you could have a single card shoot potentially, I believe 3 times, because you put it on the right, you deploy another card there, move it over, deploy another card, move it over, and then it's your turn to attack. There's your 3 attacks with a single card. And if that's with the Barracuda, for example, you've got the base range damage and also the barrage on all 3 of those shots. So that is absolutely devastating. And it's a really cool ability. And the sort of general rule of thumb with this guy is to load up your deck with the cheap taunt drones. Tau do have quite a few very cheap taunt cards, and we'll look at a couple of those real quick. The most common ones being this guy, and where's the other guys? This one? Yeah, these 2. 3-point drones with taunt, really, really good. And they really let you, and this guy is fairly common as well, so 10. They're all very cheap. Those are really terrific cards to build around Darkstrider, and that's kind of the most common way to build him. There's a downside to that, though. They don't take up many of your deck points, but they do take up card slots in your deck, so they do limit the other offensive options you have in there. And just like any of the Servants or Eldar Warlords, there's a balance here where any card you put in with the intention of getting it killed is 1 less useful card in your deck. And so I appreciate Taunt. I like putting a couple in decks with him, but I tend to go as low as 1 or none. For me, I'll actually use the cheap target acquired cards instead. So where are you, buddy? This one actually features quite a bit. And then there's this sniper drone. Where are you? I should remember this one. Anyway, point being, yeah, there you are. I actually use those instead of the taunt cards. You'll put them across from something dangerous, so they're going to die anyway, but they actually have a ranged attack themselves, which the taunt drones don't. And they allow you to remove that scary card rather than waiting to shoot back after you're shot. So it's actually a significantly more aggressive way to build Darkstrider, but I definitely prefer it, and have performed better with Darkstrider paired with target acquired than with taunt. A couple things you don't want in a Darkstrider deck is you don't want Endless, because that does not do you any good, and you want to be a little careful about use of shields, because any cheaper card you want in there is taking away from the powerful heavy hitters that you want to do that ranged damage and be moved around quite a bit. If you have the Medicae, that's a great one to drop in there to keep your big hitters healed up, but also is not terribly durable himself, so he will die and give you that chance too. So general wisdom is to run Taunt. I would recommend taking a look at some other options just to see some different deck builds. You do see those Taunt drones appear in basically all of these decks, but with Darkstrider in particular, I do kind of like to play around a little bit more. Next up, we're going to jump to Onva. He is legendary, so he's got the dual trait, always had that inspiring presence, and now has gained shields, which is really good, because he's always been one of those warlords where if he hit the board, you had probably lost because he wasn't terribly durable. And it's such a shooting-heavy faction, he doesn't have a ranged attack. So usually you'd have a moment where either he was doing melee, none of your other bodyguards are really doing anything, or your bodyguards are doing shooting, and he was just getting shot back by whatever was in front of him. He is still on the cheaper side, just a little bit cheaper or more expensive than Darkstrider. Has decent stats at max level, or at least he has decent hit points and a lot of shields. Has really minimal attack. The secret sauce for this guy is going to be his ability, Paradox of Duality. Very Tau. Whenever one of your Tau cards is attacked, it gains 50% of the damage attack stat of that type. So what that means is whenever your card takes damage, if it has that attack type, so if it's shot and it has a ranged attack, it will gain attack damage that stacks. So you can have cards build up extremely powerful attacks. He really, really does well with your Riptides, because they have a ton of hit points. They have high damage to start, so as they start ramping that up, they can actually take enough hits to really benefit from that ability and also make a difference initially. So you can kill some stuff and then also have them ramp up power later. Another fact, one that's very common, is going to be your Enrage cards, your Berserk cards. I believe this is actually the only one Tau have right now, but you get this guy at high level. He's both getting his Berserk damage boost and then also getting the boost from Onva. So really can be quite scary very quickly. And you're looking at this thing, you want to remove this thing fast if you're up against an Onva deck, because it can ramp up real fast. The obvious elephant in the room is Tau don't have any psychic attacks, so if you take psychic damage, it does nothing unless you also have Berserk. The other thing too, and this is where it's funny that Onva got shields, is if your shields absorb the damage, you don't take the attack, and so you don't gain the damage bonus. So there's this weird balancing act with Onva where like this guy is actually kind of bad or slightly worse because he doesn't benefit from the ability there. He's still good to have a couple shield cards in there. I would just keep them on the cheaper side and not expect them to do a lot of the heavy lifting in the deck. They're still good cards to include, but that's always kind of the weird balance with Onva. And also him being melee and Tau being such a strong ranged deck, it's always kind of a weird thing to build. You can build a melee aggressive deck now, but it's not good. You can try it, you can play with it. I'm sure one day at some point there will be a powerful version, but I would not hold my breath. But yeah, so you can kind of play around with this. The Kroot are actually nice because they have decent stats and they're very cheap, and they have decent starting attack in both melee and ranged for most of the cases, and they're cheap. So if you want to load up a deck with your Kroot and then kind of fill in with some heavy hitters, it can actually be a very effective deck. I enjoy Onva's ability, but I don't play him very much just because of kind of all the pitfalls I've talked about. He's just trying to do a lot of different things, and it can or can't work, and your matchups can really mess with you, and the complete and total lack of Psychic really, really hurts him. So he's not as good at shooting as basically any of the other Warlords, and doesn't really have all that much else going for him. You do see him, I know a fair number of people that swear by him, but I've not personally figured him out very well. I'm going to talk about the next two kind of together. I'm going to skip around a little bit. I want to talk about both Shadowsun and Farsight. Now they both have very similar abilities in that, so they're both epic. They both have dual traits. They both have an attack on drop that goes up to rank 4. She's got precision shot, and he has furious charge. So he does a melee hit when he drops, and she does a ranged hit when she drops. They both, I believe, have inspiring presence, yes. So they can get up to rank 2 inspiring presence, which is nice, and they both have really high base attack stats, so that does benefit them a lot, as well as whatever bodyguards are on the board and alive. But the reason I'm lumping them together is they both have a very similar ability, which is when your last card is deployed, your deployed Tau cards heal to full wounds. They both have that part of the ability, and then Shadowsun, has the additional where her surviving bodyguards and her gain plus 20 ranged attack. So whatever bodyguards you have left become quite a bit more devastating. Farsight's is a little different, where his bodyguards heal just like Shadowsun, but then his melee attack readies 5 times, which charges him up to do a really devastating melee hit, especially if you have him leveled up pretty aggressively to where he has that very hard-hitting melee attack and that rank 2 inspiring presence. And that attack stat doesn't look that high, but when you look at the melee attack bonus he's going to have, especially since you've probably been shooting all game, so you've been gradually building up your melee hit, he can hit really, really hard, especially because he does his attack on drop, and then you get to hit with his beefed up melee attack. Let me check back here. No, okay. Once upon a time, he didn't have a ranged attack at all, which is a real bummer if you went up against Akaran. You had no way to strip those shields before punching it. I am very glad they added that back, especially at his price point. But yeah, one thing I really wanted to note with both of these is both of those abilities say when your last card is deployed, not when your Warlord is deployed. So depending on how the game is going, you can play Shadowsun or Farsight early and still have, say, 1 or 2 bodyguards in your deck, and then not use your full heal ability until you want to. So you can kind of choose when actually you heal up all your cards. And so that's an important thing to note, is it's not your Warlord, it's your last card, which doesn't have to be your Warlord. When you're playing against them, you want to be really, really careful to watch the number of cards they have left in the deck, because the AI will always play the Warlord last, but also whenever the Warlord drops, whatever else you're hitting will heal back up to full. So if you're close, you want to see if you can manage that to not hit in a way where you will get a board wipe rather than kill 1 bodyguard and then have the other 2 get down to like 5 health and then heal back up to full. So that's something to be very careful of, and that could swing a close game against you if you accidentally get the scary bodyguards healed back up to full when they were almost dead. So watch out for that. Make sure to check on your timing when you're fighting these guys. Don't get too excited. Shadowsun in particular I find will smack you right back for that, because her ability is really focused on shooting, and her bodyguards are focused on shooting as well. Where they differ a little bit is Shadowsun is more of a support hero. She doesn't get quite as durable. Her hit points are actually relatively low, but her ranged attack is, when she drops, that'll go up to 115 base, plus the Inspire, plus whatever charge up you have there. So that's really devastating. With Farsight, you get the extra hit points, but he again is melee instead of ranged. He can shoot, so he does some damage there. But where Farsight really stands out is that he is a headhunter. He is built to charge up this really devastating attack and punch an enemy warlord in the face and take it out. Whereas Shadowsun does rely on her bodyguards a little bit more to finish things off, even though her primary attack is very intense too. And at max level, she's dropping that 115 damage. Oh, excuse me. So the other thing too to note is that the Furious Charge and the Precision Shot happen before their abilities actually trigger. So when she does Precision Shot, it'll be 95, and then when she follows up, it'll be 115, plus whatever you get from that Inspiring Presence. That's thrown me off a couple times, is the timing on that her ability does trigger first. And that is important to note because, say for example, she's up against a Parasite of Mortrex, and the bodyguards are infested, she's hitting something that has Death Blow. If she kills a Death Blow card, it blows up, it kills her bodyguards before her ability triggers. So the timing of that Precision Shot is actually very important there and a good thing to watch out for. Extremely edge case, but that is something to kind of keep in mind. Yeah, of the two, I personally like Farsight a little bit better, just because he's one I started with early on, and as a starting player, Headhunter Warlords really help you close out close games, because they let you get that one-on-one fight with a Warlord to take him out, and a lot of Warlords are fairly vulnerable to that. Some aren't, of course, and against those ones, Shadowsun's going to be a little bit better, because she's cheaper, has similar offensive output. But against those Warlords you can pick off, Farsight has a slight edge, and so I like him a lot. Also, he's the melee Tau card and has cool backstory, so yeah, that's the thing. Next up, we're going to talk about Shas'o. And I would say, similar to my Orc breakdown, he's one of the least seen Tau Warlords, and I would argue by a good clip is the most powerful. Now the reason for that is he has a very strong ranged attack himself, good heavy stats. He's expensive, but that's not the worst thing. Ooh, that's a note there. Farsight does trigger Big Game Hunter. So Big Game Hunter cards will hit him extra hard. Shadowsun does not. She's low enough that she won't take bonus damage from those, and that can trigger in some edge cases too. Shas'o will. He's right on the line, so at that 40 cost, you will take extra damage from your Big Game Hunter cards. And he's got both that shield and then also that rank 2 precision shot. At rank 2, it's not going to be that impressive, but it can finish off a weak bodyguard or clear a shield. Still not something to ignore. The real great thing about him is that he's very durable, does hit fairly hard himself, but then his ability is fantastic. So this is a lot of text, but long story short, you've got a rotation where every single turn you get a different bonus, and it rotates each turn. So turn 1, you get plus 20% range damage to all cards on the board. Second, you get plus 40% damage to all range cards on the board. And then third, you get reduced damage by 20%. And this rotates, so you get 20%, 40% reduced damage, 20%, 40% reduced damage. So it's this nice cadence throughout the game that actually works out perfectly. So you've got your soften up opening turn, your absolutely wreck 'em second turn, and then your reduced damage when your bodyguards are bleeding a little bit in that final turn. And that cadence is really good. And the reason I talk it up so much is that 40% damage bonus is huge. That's a crazy amount of bonus damage. And he is also the only Warlord whose ability triggers when he's not on the board, without any of your friendly cards dying, and without any of your friendly cards taking damage. So you can run a really fast deck with a high initiative and bank on getting that first volley before the enemy deck gets a chance to hit you, and have a very aggressive start to your games that helps you kind of carry them through to the finish. Crazy powerful ability, and I am a big fan of very consistent, predictable, passive abilities that you can rely on happening within a set cadence, as opposed to stuff like Darkstrider. You can get unlucky with your drops, or with Onva you could hit a psychic deck and whoops, you can't do anything. And then also the other two, their abilities don't trigger until the final card is played in your deck, so they don't do anything for your cards until the end of the game, where Shas'o is there helping them out the entire game. And if you want to play aggressive and deploy some big hitters early, you'll actually feel that. And so if you're up against Shas'o, and also him having shields at the end game does make him very difficult to remove and to close out the game if you're up against him. So tough matchup, very powerful card. He's the newest Tau Warlord and is epic, so you're not going to see a lot of them because most of them are low level, even mine. but still, I consider him one of my most competitive Tau Warlords, even at level 5. So definitely watch out for him. He is real good. We've talked a little bit about the bodyguards, but let me sort of run through and see if there are any I missed. You do see a fair number of barrage cards. Got this guy here, an 8-point barrage card. That is a really strong attack damage. It's 8 points with a lot of hit points. You're going to see a lot of this guy because it's really, really good to have that barrage to clear shields and finish off injured cards. Terrific in your Darkstrider decks where you can cruise across and do that spray across every card on the opposite side of the board. Same for this guy, just have these cheap drones that just spray damage all over the place. Also very good in Shas'o because they just get the bonus damage. Very, very good. You've got your little Inspire drone. You can really do a lot with these drones. You could have both of your Riptides and then just fill with drones and have a very effective deck. I would do that with one of the more durable Warlords because your Warlord's probably going to end up in the board a lot, but that is not a bad way to play and a fairly consistent way you see a lot. But then also kind of the mid-range battle suits, you can also build a deck that's kind of balanced around them. Onva does nicely with like this guy. A lot of these guys have both ranged and melee and are at like a middling price point with a decent amount of hit points. So those are all, you can just fill a deck with those and do fairly well. But I think you'll do better if you load in at least some of the big heavy hitters. And not this guy because he doesn't have a melee attack. Sorry, buddy. It never gets one. Okay. But yeah, that I think will do it for our Tau rundown. Hopefully that was helpful. And of course, let me know if there's a faction you'd like to see next. I'll get to all of them eventually, but I'm prioritizing who's asking for what first. So yeah, until next time.